The dust tastes of defeat. Anya Volkov feels it on her tongue, a fine grit coating the inside of her mouth as she reins in her black mare, Nightwind. Below her, nestled in a shallow basin carved by a forgotten river, is the last holdout. Thorn's place. It's less a ranch and more a stubborn scar on the vast, open palm of the territory she is determined to close her fist around. A piddling 30 acres, a shack that looks one strong wind away from surrendering, and a line of cottonwoods that betray the one thing that makes this worthless patch of dirt the most valuable land for 100 miles. Water. A spring, constant and clear, bubbling up from the earth's heart. Her heart, she has often thought, is a dry and dusty thing by comparison. Her foreman, a burly man named Silas, spits a brown stream of tobacco juice near his horse's hooves. He's out there, ma'am, just standing, like he's expecting company for tea. Anya's gaze narrows. She sees him, a lone figure by a weathered fence post, his frame thin inside a frayed shirt. He isn't holding a rifle, which is a surprise. Most of them did, right up until the end. It never changed the outcome, only the paperwork. This one, Elias Thorne, is the final piece. With his spring, her herds can graze this entire quadrant through the dry season. Without it, her grand ambition, the Volkov cattle empire that would stretch from the Red Bluffs to the Serpent River, would remain just that, an ambition, vulnerable to the whims of the sky. She has not come this far, fought this hard, to be thwarted by a scarecrow of a man and his muddy little spring. Let's conclude this, she says, her voice as flat and hard as the plains around them. She nudges Nightwind forward, the creak of her saddle leather a sound of grim purpose. Her men fall in behind her, a silent, formidable wedge of leather and steel. This is how it is done. An overwhelming show of force, a final, non-negotiable offer, and the inevitable capitulation. She has done this a dozen times. It is business. It is progress. It is the building of a legacy in a land that swallows weak men whole. Danger's close, and a rescue might be at hand. Before we see if justice or peril finds them, share in the comments. What's your favorite story about someone being saved against the odds? And if you're rooting for them, hit like and subscribe. As they draw closer, the details of the homestead emerge from the heat haze. It is poor, undeniably, but it is not neglected. A small patch of earth near the shack is meticulously tilled, with green shoots pushing up in determined rows. A woman's touch, she thinks, then dismisses it. Sentiment is a luxury, like silk sheets or a long Sunday morning. She has no use for it. The man, Thorne, doesn't move. He just watches them come, his stillness a strange sort of defiance. It is not the aggressive posture of a fighter, nor the slumped shoulders of the defeated. It is something else, something she cannot immediately categorize, and that irritates her. She halts Nightwind a dozen yards from the fence. The air crackles with the unspoken. Her men fan out, a silent, intimidating crescent. Thorne, she says. Her voice carries easily in the quiet air. You know why I'm here. The bank holds your note. I hold the bank. It was a simplification, but an effective one. She had systematically bought up the debt of every small-time rancher and homesteader whose land bordered hers. It was cleaner than bullets. He finally moves, his hands coming up to rest on the top rail of the fence. His knuckles are white. I know, he says. His voice is quieter than she expected, rough but not weak. I got your letters. Then you know the offer is final. $500. More than this dust bowl is worth to anyone but me. He gives a small, humorless shake of his head. He looks past her, at the vast, rolling hills that are already hers, dotted with her cattle branded with the stylized V, that is both her initial and a chevron of conquest. It's worth more to me, he says, his voice dropping to a near whisper, carried on the wind. Not in dollars. Silas shifts in his saddle. Ma'am, we can have the sheriff out here with the eviction notice by sundown. Anya holds up a hand, silencing him. She is intrigued, in a detached, clinical way. This is a deviation from the script. The world runs on dollars, Mr. Thorne, not sentiment. My wife is buried on that rise, he says, nodding toward a small, fenced-off plot near the cottonwoods. We built this cabin with our own hands. We planted those trees. The water from that spring, it was the first thing our son drank after he was born. He's buried there, too, next to her. Anya's jaw tightens. This is a tactic, a plea for pity. She has heard it before. She has hardened her heart against it. Pity is a poison that paralyzes progress. I am sorry for your loss, she says, and the words are cold, formal, an empty ritual. But your past cannot stand in the way of my future. He looks at her then, truly looks at her, and his eyes are a pale, washed-out blue, the color of a winter sky. There is no hatred in them, only a profound, bottomless sorrow, a sorrow that seems to be for her, as much as for himself. It is unsettling. You're building an empire, Miss Volkov, he says, his voice gaining a strange clarity. A legacy. I've heard them talk about you in town. The Iron Baroness. They say you've never been beaten. A reputation I've earned, she clips out. I'm sure you have, he agrees, his gaze unwavering. But what is a legacy if it's built on a graveyard? You'll have the land. You'll have the water. Your cattle will grow fat. But this place, this little piece of it, it will be a ghost. A monument to what you destroyed to get what you wanted. He takes a step back from the fence, his hands falling to his sides. He is not pleading anymore. He is making a statement. A prophecy. I won't sell, he says softly. You'll have to take it. Anya sits on her horse, the sun beating down on her, the silence stretching. She feels a flicker of something unfamiliar. A hesitation. He has offered no violence, no threats, only the weight of his truth. He has weaponized his grief, his history, and aimed it directly at the hollow place inside her where her own humanity might have once resided. He is showing her the cost, not in dollars, but in something far more essential. She looks at the small garden, the sturdy though crude cabin, the two small, fenced-off graves on the hill. She sees not a strategic asset, but a home, a life, and she sees herself as he has painted her, a destroyer. The image is ugly, and it sticks. Silas clears his throat, impatient. Ma'am. The moment passes. Her resolve hardens again, the flicker of doubt extinguished by the cold winds of necessity. She cannot afford to be weak. Kane, her rival to the north, would see it and pounce. The bankers in the east, who held her own notes, would smell it and tighten the leash. Power is not a thing to be held gently. She dismounts, her boots hitting the ground with a solid thud. The dust rises around her. She walks to the fence, her movements deliberate, powerful. She stops directly in front of him, the weathered wood the only thing between them. I will have this land, Thorn, she says, her voice low and intense. But I will not have it be a ghost. And with those words, a new, cold, and calculated idea forms in her mind, a different kind of conquest. I will not have it haunt my legacy. His life, and hers, were about to become irrevocably entangled. Elias Thorne had known the end was coming for months. It had been a slow, creeping dread, like a shadow lengthening at dusk. The drought of the previous summer had been the first blow, shrinking his meager corn crop and forcing him to sell off the few head of cattle he'd kept. The loan he'd taken from the bank in Redemption Creek, meant for seed and a new plow, became an anchor, dragging him under. Then came the letters, first from the bank, then from the Volkov Land and Cattle Company. The language grew colder, more demanding, with each passing week. He was a fly caught in a web, and he could feel the vibrations of the spider approaching. The land was all he had left of Mary. Every fence post he'd sunk, he'd done with her beside him, holding it steady. The cabin, rough-hewn and drafty, echoed with the memory of her laughter. She'd loved the sound the wind made through the cottonwoods, a sound she called the world's lullaby after they lost the baby, a boy they'd named Samuel who had lived only 3 days. That lullaby had been the only thing that brought her any peace. When she'd followed their son into the earth a year later, the fever taking her in a matter of days, Elias had thought the silence would kill him. But the land remained. The spring still bubbled, the trees still sang their song. He was its keeper, the keeper of their memory. He had watched Anya Volkov's empire grow from a distance. He'd heard the stories. A woman of unknown origin, some said Russian, who had arrived 5 years ago with a small fortune and an unquenchable thirst for land. She didn't use guns, not primarily. She used money, law, and intimidation, wielding them with a surgeon's precision. Men who stood against her found their supply lines cut, their credit revoked, their brands mysteriously blotted on cattle that wandered onto her range. She was an elemental force, like the drought or the blizzards, and you didn't fight her. You endured her, or you were swept away. Now, she stood before him, the dust of his land on her expensive boots. She was taller than he'd expected, lean and hard, with dark hair pulled back severely from a face that was all sharp angles and fierce intelligence. Her eyes, the color of dark smoke, missed nothing. They assessed his worn clothes, the calluses on his hands, the weary lines around his eyes, and tallied them up as weaknesses. Her offer was a shock. He had expected her to order Silas and her other men to simply tear down the fence and drive him off. Instead, she had proposed something far stranger, and in its own way, more cruel. "You will stay," she had said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "The bank will foreclose. I will purchase the deed at auction for $1. It will all be legal and tidy. And then I will hire you." He had stared at her, uncomprehending. "Hire me? You clearly know how to manage the water here. My men do not. They are cowboys, not gardeners. You will maintain the spring, the irrigation ditches you've dug. You will keep this vegetable patch. You will live in the cabin. I will pay you $20 a month. You will be an employee on my land." It was a breathtakingly arrogant proposition, a way to possess not just his land, but his dignity, to make him a servant in his own home, a warden of his own memories. He would be a living ghost, a constant reminder of her victory. The humiliation of it burned in his throat. But beneath the humiliation was the cold, hard reality. Winter was coming. He had no money, no prospects. $20 a month was a fortune. It was food. It was survival. And more than that, he would get to stay. He would still be able to tend the graves. He would still hear the wind in the cottonwoods. She could own the deed, the paper in a dusty office in town, but he would still have the soil under his fingernails. He would still be here. "Why?" he had asked, the word raspy. Her smoky eyes had met his. "I told you, I will not have my legacy haunted. A dead man's ranch is a sad, useless thing. A working springhead, managed by a man who knows it, that is an asset. Your grief is not my concern. Your skill is." And so he had agreed. What choice was there? He had watched them ride away, leaving him in a cloud of dust and the bitter taste of his own surrender. The town of Redemption Creek, a place that had once felt like a community, now felt like a gallery of spectators. The banker, Mr. Abernathy, a man who had known Elias's father, wouldn't meet his eye when he signed the final foreclosure papers. Abernathy's pockets were lined with Volkov's silver now. The sheriff, a man named Calloway whose spine seemed to be made of jelly, offered his condolences while his eyes darted around nervously, as if Anya Volkov herself might be listening from the shadows. The whispers followed him. Heard Volkov took his place, gave him a job, they say. Like a pet, he saw the pity in some eyes, the scorn in others. He was no longer Elias Thorne, Homesteader. He was the man who had bent the knee to the Iron Baroness. The town's judgment was a heavy cloak, but the solitude of his cabin was heavier. Now, the silence wasn't just filled with memories of Mary. It was filled with the crushing weight of his failure to protect what they had built. A week after the legalities were settled, Anya Volkov returned. She came alone this time, riding Nightwind as if she were part of the horse. She dismounted not at the fence, but by the cabin, her movements fluid and confident. She did not act like a visitor. She acted like an owner inspecting her property. Elias was weeding the garden, his back aching. He straightened up slowly, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of a dirty hand. He watched her approach, his heart a-tight, weary knot in his chest. "The spring is running clear," she stated, not asked. She had already been there, he realized. The flow seemed strong. "It always is," he said, "even in the dry times." She nodded, her gaze sweeping over his small, tidy rows of beans, squash, and late-season tomatoes. "Impressive. My cook complains he can't get produce this fresh even from the merchants who bring it in by rail." He didn't know what to say to that. It felt like a compliment, but coming from her, it felt more like an appraisal of an asset. "I am moving 200 head into this quadrant tomorrow," she said, getting to the point. "They will water at the creek downstream from the spring. I want you to monitor the water level. Any drop, any sign of contamination, you ride to the main ranch and report to Silas. Immediately. Do you have a horse?" "A mule. He's old, but he's steady." She looked at the sway-backed animal standing listlessly in the small, rickety corral. Her lip curled in a faint expression of distaste. "That won't do. A man could die of old age waiting for that creature to get him anywhere. I'll have one of the boys drop off a horse for you. A gelding. Serviceable. He stiffened. My mule is fine. It was another humiliation, another reminder of his dependency. It is not, she countered, her voice sharp. My investment in this land is significant. My cattle are valuable. I will not risk either on your sentiment for a half-dead animal. A horse will be here by morning. You will use it. That is an order, Thorn. She turned to leave, her inspection complete, her commands issued. But then she paused, her back to him. She seemed to be looking at the two graves on the hill. The setting sun cast her long shadow over the ground, a dark finger pointing toward them. You keep the graves tidy, she said, her voice softer, almost reflective. It was so unexpected that it startled him. It's the least I can do. She was silent for a long moment. In my country, she said, still not looking at him, we believe the dead watch over the land. They anchor it. Keep it from becoming just dirt. She turned her head slightly, her profile stark against the reddening sky. Perhaps your ghosts will be good for business. And then she was gone, mounting her horse and riding off into the twilight, leaving Elias standing amidst the ghosts she spoke of, feeling more like one of them than ever before. He was no longer the master of his land, but merely its curator, a paid servant to his own memories and a ruthless woman's legacy. The horse arrived the next morning as promised, a sturdy bay gelding with a quiet disposition. It was a good animal, better than any Elias could have afforded. He led it to the corral, untied his old mule, Jericho, and gave the animal a long, affectionate scratch behind the ears. She thinks you're slow, he murmured to the mule. But we know better, don't we? Steady is what matters. He felt a pang of resentment, but it was overshadowed by a grudging practicality. The bay would be faster. The ranch was a good 10 miles away. If there was trouble, speed would matter. The arrival of the Volkov cattle changed the character of his small valley. The quiet was replaced by a constant, low bawling. The scent of sage and dust was now mixed with the smell of livestock. Her cowboys, hard-faced men who looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and contempt, set up a line camp half a mile downstream. He was an object of speculation for them. The homesteader, the boss, had kept on. They gave him a wide berth, as if his defeat were a contagious disease. Elias kept to his routine. He rose before dawn, checked the spring, tended his garden, and repaired the irrigation ditches that channeled the precious water to his crops. He spent his afternoons reinforcing the fence around the graves and the cabin, ensuring no stray steer would wander in and do damage. It was his land in all but name, and he cared for it with a devotion that went beyond the $20 a month she paid him. He was tending his own heart. Anya Volkov came by once a week. Her visits were always unannounced and strictly business. She would inspect the spring, question him about the water flow, and scan the grazing herd with an expert eye. She never stayed long. Their conversations were clipped and professional, two strangers bound by a contract. The water level in the creek is down an inch, she observed one afternoon, her gaze fixed on a marker stick he'd placed. It's the heat, he replied, and 200 head drink a lot of water. But the spring itself is constant. The source is deep. Show me. He led her up the short path to where the water bubbled out from between a cluster of moss-covered rocks. The air was cooler here, shaded by the cottonwoods. The water was so clear you could see every pebble on the bottom of the pool it formed before trickling out to become the creek. She knelt, cupping a hand and drinking from it. She closed her eyes for a moment, and in that unguarded instant, he saw the tension leave her face. He saw not the Iron Baroness, but a woman who was tired. She stood, wiping her hand on her dark riding skirt. Good, she said, her professional mask slipping back into place. Keep watch. During one of her visits, as she was preparing to leave, she noticed the book lying on the small, rickety table on his porch. It was a well-worn copy of Leaves of Grass. You read poetry? The question was laced with surprise, and perhaps a touch of condescension. My wife, she enjoyed it, he said, the defensiveness in his voice sharp. She taught me to read it, to see the world through the words. Anya looked from the book to him, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. My father read poetry. Pushkin, in the old country. He said it was the only way to keep your soul from freezing in the winter. She seemed to catch herself, as if she had revealed too much. A frivolous luxury for a man with work to do. Thorn, she mounted her horse and rode away without another word. But the exchange had left a crack in the wall between them. He had seen a glimpse of a past she never spoke of, a hint of a world beyond cattle and land acquisition. And she, he suspected, had seen that he was more than just a defeated farmer. The first real test of their strange arrangement came with the storm. It rolled in from the north without warning, the sky turning a bruised purple-black in a matter of minutes. The wind came first, a low moan that rose to a violent shriek, whipping the cottonwoods into a frenzy. Then came the rain, not a steady downpour, but a solid, driving sheet of water that turned his dusty yard into a roiling brown lake. Elias secured the cabin as best he could, then fought his way through the wind to the corral, herding the bay and Jericho into the small lean-to. He knew this kind of storm. It wasn't the rain that was the biggest danger, it was the flood that would follow. The dry creek bed downstream would become a raging torrent, and her cattle, seeking low ground, would be in its direct path. He didn't hesitate. Pulling on his slicker, he saddled the bay. He had to warn the line camp. It was his job, she had said, to protect her assets. He rode out into the teeth of the storm, the wind trying to tear him from the saddle, the rain so thick he could barely see a few feet ahead. He found the cowboys huddled in their tents, oblivious. Flash flood coming, he yelled over the roar of the wind. Get the herd to high ground. Now, they looked at him, then at the sky, and scrambled into action. The next hour was a chaotic blur of shouting men, panicked cattle, and driving rain. Working together, they managed to push the terrified herd up the sloping side of the valley just as a wall of brown water, churning with debris, roared down the creek bed where they had been moments before. Soaked, freezing, and exhausted, Elias watched the floodwaters surge past. They had saved the herd. He had done his job. As the storm began to abate, he saw a rider approaching from the direction of the main ranch. It was Anya. She rode straight to him, her face pale and grim under the brim of her soaked hat. Silas was right behind her. Report, she snapped, her eyes scanning the herd, now safe on the hillside. One of the cowboys, a young man named Billy, spoke up. We'd have lost them all, ma'am. Every last one. If it weren't for Thorn. He came out in the worst of it to warn us. Anya's gaze shifted to Elias. He was shivering, his clothes plastered to his skin, but he met her look squarely. She surveyed the scene, the safe cattle, the raging creek, the drenched and weary men. She dismounted and walked over to him, stopping so close he could see the raindrops clinging to her dark eyelashes. She reached into her saddlebag and pulled out a silver flask. She uncapped it and handed it to him. Drink, she commanded. He took it, his cold fingers fumbling. The whiskey burned a trail of warmth down his throat, chasing away some of the chill. He handed it back. You saved me a great deal of money, Thorn, she said, her voice low. They're your cattle, he said simply. It was my job. You did more than your job, she corrected him. You risked your life for my property. She looked at him, and for the first time, he felt she was truly seeing him, not as a component of her business, but as a man. That was unexpected. Silas grunted. Could have sent the boy, Billy. No need for him to go himself. The foreman's words were laced with a familiar disdain, but they lacked their usual bite. Anya ignored him. Her eyes were still locked on Elias. Go back to your cabin. Get into some dry clothes before you catch your death. It was an order, but it was not unkind. As he turned to ride away, he heard her say to Silas, her voice carrying on the damp air, see that an extra $20 is added to his pay this month. Riding back to his cabin, the warmth of the whiskey spreading through him, Elias felt a subtle shift in the world. He had acted not just out of duty, but out of an instinct to protect. And she, in her own way, had acknowledged it. The transaction between them had, for a moment, become something more. He was still her employee, but he was no longer just a ghost haunting her legacy. He was becoming a part of it. The incident with the flood altered the delicate balance of their relationship. Anya's weekly visits became more frequent, and their purpose seemed to expand beyond simple inspections. She would often find an excuse to linger, asking him detailed questions about the soil, about crop rotation, about the subtle signs of the changing seasons he seemed to read as easily as a book. He, in turn, found himself speaking more freely, sharing the small bits of wisdom Mary had taught him about gardening, about how to listen to the land. One afternoon, she found him repairing the handle of a shovel, his movements patient and precise. She watched in silence for a few minutes. "You are good with your hands," she observed. "A farmer has to be," he replied without looking up. "Can't afford to pay a man to fix what you can fix yourself." "My father was a clockmaker," she said suddenly. The admission hung in the air between them. He could take 1,000 tiny pieces and make them dance in perfect time. He said that God was in the details, in the careful fitting of one small piece to another. Elias stopped his work and looked at her. "He sounds like a wise man." A shadow passed over her face. He believed that beauty and order were the only things that could hold back the chaos. He was wrong. She turned away, her tone becoming brisk again. "The fences on the western edge need checking. Some of the posts are loose after the rain." It was always like this. A brief, startling moment of intimacy, a window into the woman behind the iron mask, followed by a swift retreat to the safety of business. But the glimpses were adding up. He was piecing together a portrait of her, a woman who had known beauty and order and had seen them destroyed by chaos. Her relentless drive to build, to control, to impose her will on this vast, untamed land was not just ambition. It was a defense, a way to build a wall so high that the chaos could never reach her again. He also began to see the immense pressure she was under. Jedediah Kane, a rival cattle baron to the north, was a constant threat. Kane was a man of the old school, a believer in brute force and rustling as legitimate business practices. He viewed Anya's methodical, businesslike approach with contempt, and her gender with open disdain. He saw her as an interloper, a foreign woman who didn't belong. Elias would sometimes see Kane's riders near the borders of the Volkov range, watching, testing. One day, while checking the fence line as Anya had ordered, he found one of her steers dead, shot clean through the head. It was a message. He rode back and told Silas, who cursed and spat. When Anya heard the news, her face became a mask of cold fury. "Kane is a dog," she said, her voice tight. "And a dog that bites must be put down." But she did not retaliate with violence. Instead, she rode to the nearest railhead and met with a shipping magnate. She secured an exclusive contract, undercutting Kane's prices and ensuring her cattle would get to the eastern markets faster and cheaper than his. It was a brilliant, strategic move, a blow struck not with a gun, but with a pen. Elias heard the story from a talkative hand in the Volkov bunkhouse when he rode over to pick up supplies. He felt a grudging admiration for her cunning. She fought her battles with her mind, a far more dangerous weapon than Kane's clumsy aggression. Their own interactions continued to evolve. He had been saving the best of his late-season tomatoes, a variety Mary had prized for their sweetness. One afternoon, when Anya rode up, he was sitting on his porch, eating one slice, with a little salt. Without a word, he sliced another, salted it, and held the plate out to her. She hesitated, her eyes wary. It was a simple gesture, but it was a gift, not a transaction. It was something offered freely. After a moment, she dismounted, sat on the top step of his porch, and took the plate. She ate the tomato slowly, deliberately. A small spot of red juice appeared at the corner of her mouth. "That is," she said, her voice quiet, "the best thing I have tasted in a very long time." "The land gives it," he said. "You just have to know how to ask." She looked out over the small valley, at his green garden, at the healthy cattle grazing by the creek, at the sturdy cabin. "You have asked very politely, Mr. Thorne." "Elias," he corrected her gently. She met his gaze. "Anya," she replied. It was a turning point. The formal titles, the barriers of employer and employee, fell away. They were two people, sharing a quiet moment on a porch, the space between them filled not with resentment or obligation, but with a fragile, growing understanding. This new ease between them did not go unnoticed. Silas watched with a suspicious eye, his loyalty to Anya warring with his distrust of Elias. The other cowboys, who had once treated Elias with scorn, now offered him nods of grudging respect. He was the man who had tamed not just the land, but, in some small way, the boss herself. This perceived softness in Anya was exactly the kind of weakness Jedediah Kane had been waiting for. He saw her visits to the Thorne homestead not as business, but as a foolish, womanly attachment. He saw the homesteader she had kept on her land as a chink in her armor, and he decided it was time to strike, not at her herds or her contracts, but at the very heart of her operation, the spring. The attack came on a moonless night. Elias was woken from a deep sleep by the frantic whinnying of the bay horse. He grabbed his old shotgun, his heart pounding, and crept to the window. He could see nothing in the inky blackness, but he could feel a presence, a wrongness in the air. He slipped out the back door, keeping to the shadows of the cabin, and made his way toward the spring. As he got closer, he heard a low curse, then the sound of something heavy being dragged through the underbrush. He peered around the largest of the cottonwoods and saw them. Two men, their faces obscured by dark hats, wrestling a large canvas sack toward the pool where the spring bubbled up. He knew instantly what they were doing. Poison. It was Cain's work, cowardly and vicious. It wouldn't just kill her cattle, it would destroy the spring, perhaps forever. It would ruin the one piece of land she valued most. Rage, cold and pure, surged through him. This was his land, his spring. Mary was buried here. He would not let these thugs defile it. He stepped out from behind the tree, leveling the shotgun. "Get away from the water," he said, his voice a low growl he didn't recognize as his own. The men froze, startled. One of them dropped his side of the sack. "Well now, look what we have here," the man sneered, his hand slowly moving toward the pistol on his hip. "The Baroness's pet farmer." "I said, get away," Elias repeated, the twin barrels of the shotgun unwavering. He was terrified, but his anger was stronger than his fear. He had lost everything once before. He would not stand by and lose this. The second man, larger and slower, chuckled. "There's two of us, old man, and only one of you. He's not alone." The voice came from the darkness behind the two men. It was cold, sharp, and utterly confident. Anya stepped out of the shadows, a repeating rifle held steady in her hands. Silas and two other Volkov riders emerged with her, their own guns drawn. She must have been on her way to the main ranch from a late meeting in town and seen the strange activity. The two saboteurs were trapped. Their bravado evaporated instantly. The first man slowly raised his hands. The second followed suit. "Cain sends his regards, I assume?" Anya asked, her voice dripping with ice. The men said nothing. "It doesn't matter," she continued, taking a step closer. "He is a fool. He thinks to hurt me by destroying a piece of land. He does not understand. He hurts me. He hurts my cattle. He hurts my business when he hurts my people." She looked from the two captured men to Elias, who still held his shotgun steady, his knuckles white. Her eyes softened almost imperceptibly. He had stood his ground. For her. For the land. For them. "Silas," she ordered, "take this trash into town. Hand them over to the sheriff. Tell him I expect them to stand trial. And tell him I have a witness." She nodded toward Elias. As her men tied up Cain's thugs, Anya walked over to the canvas sack. She nudged it with her boot. A fine, grayish powder spilled out. "Arsenic," she said, her voice grim. "He would have poisoned the entire valley." She looked at Elias, at the fierce, protective anger still burning in his eyes. "You were brave, Elias." "It's my home," he said, finally lowering the shotgun, his arms trembling from the adrenaline. "Yes," she said softly, her gaze taking in the cabin, the garden, the graves on the hill. "It is." She looked back at him, and the last of the walls between them seemed to crumble into dust. "It's our home." The attempted poisoning of the spring was an act of war, and the town of Redemption Creek held its breath, waiting for Anya Volkov's response. They expected a bloody retaliation, a range war that would paint the plains red. Jedediah Cain, arrogant and overconfident, expected it too. He publicly denied any involvement, calling the captured men disgruntled former employees and dismissing Anya's accusation as the hysterical fantasy of a woman out of her depth. He postured in the town saloon, buying drinks and boasting that the Volkov empire was about to crumble. But Anya did not send her men riding north with guns blazing. Her response was quieter, colder, and far more devastating. She rode into town the next day, not with an army of cowboys, but with Elias Thorne at her side. She had insisted he come, telling him, "The town needs to see the man Cain tried to murder. They need to see who he threatened." Elias, uncomfortable in his clean but worn Sunday clothes, rode the bay gelding beside her magnificent black mare. They made an unlikely pair, the formidable Iron Baroness and the quiet, resilient Homesteader. Their first stop was the sheriff's office. Calloway, the jelly-spined sheriff, was sweating profusely. Kane's men were in his cells, but Kane himself was a powerful man in the county, and Calloway was terrified of him. "Miss Volkov," he stammered. "This is a serious accusation. Jed Kane swears he had nothing to do with it." "He lies," Anya said flatly. She placed a canvas pouch on his desk. It clinked heavily. "That is a sample of the poison. It is a specific blend used for sheep dipping, not common in this cattle territory. The only man for 100 miles who runs sheep alongside his cattle and buys his supplies from a particular merchant in Stone Creek is Jedediah Kane. I have already sent a telegraph to that merchant. A signed affidavit of Kane's purchase will be here by tomorrow." The sheriff's face went pale. This was not a wild accusation. It was a cold, hard chain of evidence. "And this," Anya continued, her voice dropping, "is Elias Thorne, the man whose home Kane's thugs invaded. The man they would have let drink from a poisoned spring. He will give you his sworn statement." Elias, finding his voice, described what had happened in clear, simple terms. He spoke of being woken by the horse, of the men by the spring, of their sneering words. He did not embellish or speculate. He just told the truth, and its quiet power was more damning than any angry tirade. Sheriff Calloway sank into his chair, the legal noose tightening around his patron. I will have to investigate further. You will issue a warrant for Jedediah Kane's arrest," Anya corrected him, her voice leaving no room for argument. "For attempted murder, conspiracy, and destruction of property. If you do not, I will take this evidence to the territorial marshal myself. And I will make sure he understands that the sheriff of Redemption Creek is either incompetent or on Kane's payroll. Your career will be over." The threat hung in the air, sharp and deadly as a guillotine. Calloway swallowed hard and nodded, reaching for a warrant form with a trembling hand. But Anya was not finished. She and Elias left the sheriff's office and walked directly to the center of town, where a crowd had gathered, drawn by the sight of their arrival. Kane was there, holding court on the steps of the saloon, a smug look on his face. When he saw them, and the determined look in Anya's eyes, his smile faltered. Well, Kane boomed, trying to regain control. "Look who it is. The foreign witch and her pet farmer. Come to spin some more lies." Anya stopped at the bottom of the steps, forcing him to look down on her. She let the silence stretch, her cool, unwavering gaze drawing the attention of every person in the square. "Your men are in jail, Kane," she said, her voice carrying with chilling clarity. "The warrant for your arrest is being drawn up as we speak." A murmur went through the crowd. Kane's face darkened with rage. "That's a lie. You have no proof." "I have a signed statement from my witness," she said, gesturing to Elias. "And I have proof of your purchase of the poison. Your brand of cowardly violence ends today." It was then that Elias stepped forward. All eyes turned to him. He was not an imposing figure like Kane, or a powerful one like Anya. He was just a man of the land, his face weathered by sun and sorrow. "Mr. Kane," he began, his voice quiet but steady, resonating with an unexpected authority. "You see land as something to be conquered, to be taken and used until it is spent, and then you move on. I've seen men like you my whole life. You leave behind dust and bitterness." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the faces in the crowd, many of them small homesteaders like himself, people who knew the daily struggle against the land and the greed of powerful men. "Miss Volkov, Anya, she took my land. That is the truth. But she did not destroy it. She saw its heart. She saw the water that gives it life. A legacy isn't about how much you can own. It is about what you can build, what you can nurture and leave behind for those who come after. You tried to poison a spring, Mr. Kane. You tried to poison the future. That is not the act of a strong man. It is the act of a desperate coward." A profound silence fell over the town square. Elias's words, born of his own loss and his deep connection to his home, had struck a chord. He had redefined the terms of the conflict, elevating it from a simple range dispute to a moral battle over the soul of the land itself. Kane, exposed and shamed, his bluster stripped away, was left sputtering. "You'll listen to this dirt scrabbler? This man who sold his own home for a woman's wages." But the insult fell flat. The crowd was no longer with him. They saw him for what he was, a bully who had overplayed his hand. And they saw Elias Thorne not as a defeated man, but as a man of quiet, unshakable integrity. They saw Anya Volkov not as a ruthless conqueror, but as a protector. Just then, Sheriff Calloway emerged from his office, the warrant in his hand. He looked at Kane, then at the silent, watchful crowd, and for the first time in a long time, he seemed to find a sliver of his own spine. "Jedediah Kane," he said, his voice loud and clear. "You are under arrest." Kane's men, who had been standing behind him on the saloon porch, suddenly found reasons to be elsewhere, melting back into the shadows. Kane was alone. As the sheriff led him away in cuffs, his face a mask of disbelief and fury, a new order settled over Redemption Creek. Anya and Elias stood together in the center of the square. They had not touched, had not exchanged a word, but their unity was palpable. She had brought the evidence and the power. He had brought the truth and the heart. Together, they had faced down the chaos and won. She looked at him, a flicker of awe in her smoky eyes. He had done more than just stand witness. He had given voice to the very soul of her new, evolving legacy, the one he was now inextricably a part of. The land was legally hers, but the victory, this victory, was entirely theirs. The ride back to the homestead was quiet, the air charged with the aftermath of the confrontation. The sun was setting, painting the sky in strokes of orange and violet. The sounds of their horses' hooves on the dusty track and the creak of saddle leather were the only interruptions to the vast, peaceful silence of the plains. They rode side by side, a comfortable space between them that was no longer filled with tension or mistrust, but with a deep, unspoken accord. When they reached the cabin, Elias dismounted and moved to help Anya, but she swung down from Nightwind with her usual fluid grace before he could reach her. She stood for a moment, stroking the mare's neck, her gaze fixed on the small, sturdy house that was now the center of her world in a way her grand ranch house had never been. "You spoke well today, Elias," she said, her voice soft. "I just said what was true." He took the reins of both horses to lead them to the corral. "Truth is a rare commodity," she murmured, watching him, "and a dangerous one. You wielded it like a sword." He stopped and looked back at her. "It's the only weapon I have." She walked toward him, stopping at the fence of the small vegetable garden. She reached down and touched a leaf on a squash vine, her gesture gentle, contemplative. "For years, I believed the only way to build something that lasts is with stone and iron and law. To make it so big and so strong that nothing could ever tear it down." She looked up, her eyes meeting his over the low fence. "You are building something here with soil and water and patience, and it feels more permanent than anything I have ever owned." The word owned hung in the air for a second, a relic of their old dynamic, before dissolving in the new reality they had forged. "It's not about owning," he said quietly. "It's about belonging to it." Anya nodded slowly, a profound understanding dawning in her expression. She had spent her life conquering, possessing, controlling. She had tried to buy a legacy. Elias was showing her that a true legacy had to be earned, nurtured, and belonged to. They stood in the deepening twilight, the first stars beginning to prick the dark velvet of the sky. The wind whispered through the cottonwoods, the sound no longer just a memory of Mary's lullaby for Elias, but a song of their own making. "The legal title to this land is in my name," Anya said, her voice formal, as if she were closing a business deal, but her eyes told a different story. "That is a fact that cannot be easily changed. But facts can be amended." She reached into the inner pocket of her jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She held it out to him. "I had my lawyer draw this up last week, after the attack. I had not decided what to do with it. Until today." He took it, his calloused fingers unfolding the crisp legal document. He read it by the fading light. It was a partnership agreement. It named Elias Thorne as a full partner in the Thorne Spring Ranch, a newly designated subsidiary of the Volkov Land and Cattle Company. It gave him operational control of the 30 acres and a significant share of the profits derived from the cattle watered there. It was not a gift of charity. It was an acknowledgement of his value, his contribution, his rightful place. He looked up at her, his throat tight with emotion. He was speechless. "My legacy," she said, answering his unspoken question, "is worthless if it is built on the ruins of a good man's life." It will be stronger with you as a partner than it ever could be with you as an employee. She gave a small, wry smile. It is also good business. You have a talent for this that I lack. He carefully folded the paper and slipped it into his shirt pocket, placing it over his heart. Anya, he began, but the words failed him. You do not need to say anything, she said, her voice gentle. We will simply continue. The new arrangement settled into a comfortable rhythm. Elias was no longer just a caretaker. He was an innovator. He showed Anya how a system of rotating pastures could keep the grass healthier and the cattle fatter. He expanded the garden, and soon a wagon loaded with fresh produce from the Thorn Spring Ranch was making weekly trips to the Volkov bunkhouse and even to the market in Redemption Creek, a small but steady source of income. Anya, in turn, began to spend more and more of her time at the homestead. She brought books from her library, and they would read aloud to each other on the porch in the evenings. She spoke of her childhood in a cold, distant land, of the political upheaval that had stolen her family and her inheritance, forcing her to flee to America with nothing but a handful of jewels and a will of iron. He spoke of Mary, of their dreams, not with the sharp pain of fresh grief, but with the quiet, gentle fondness of a cherished memory. They were mapping the landscapes of each other's pasts, finding common ground in their shared experiences of loss and survival. Her reputation in the territory began to change. The Iron Baroness was still a formidable businesswoman, but she was now seen as something more, a force for stability and fair dealing. Homesteaders who had once feared her now approached her for advice, and she, guided by Elias's quiet wisdom, often helped them secure more favorable loans or better prices for their goods. Her legacy was no longer a monument to solitary power, but a thriving ecosystem of prosperity, with the small homestead at its heart. One evening, months later, they were standing by the spring as the full moon rose over the bluffs, bathing the valley in a soft, silvery light. The water bubbled peacefully, a constant, life-giving pulse. Do you remember what you said to me the first day I came here? Anya asked, her voice a low murmur. You said this place would be a ghost, a monument to what I destroyed. I remember, he said. You were wrong, she said, turning to face him. The moonlight softened the sharp angles of her face, revealing a vulnerability he had never seen before. It is not a monument to destruction. It is a monument to reclamation. She reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were long and slender, but her grip was firm, sure. You have reclaimed this land from your grief. And you have reclaimed me from myself. Elias looked at their joined hands, then into her smoky eyes. He saw his own reflection there, no longer a desperate, defeated man, but someone whole. Someone who had found a new reason to build, to nurture. We did it together, he said. The land, the spring, the legacy, it was no longer his or hers. It was theirs, built not on a whisper of desperation, but on a foundation of mutual respect, shared strength, and the quiet, enduring promise of the land itself. Thanks for watching. If you believe in compassion, overcoming prejudice, and finding love in unexpected places, give this story a like and subscribe for more. This story showed love and heroism where least expected. What was your favorite moment of connection between them? Tell us in the comments.